Vanessa Harper sat in the front row of the courtroom with both hands resting neatly on an expensive cream-colored leather purse. She gently wiped away tears as she told the judge that Evelyn was no longer mentally stable enough to manage her own life. The entire room fell completely silent. No one seemed to notice that the woman crying over her concern for her stepdaughter was wearing the Rolex watch her husband had bought less than a year before he died. Seattle was buried under the cold rain of early January. Foggy drops clung to the tall courthouse windows of King County Probate Court, turning the daylight outside pale and gray like an old photograph. Evelyn Harper sat quietly at the far end of the defense table, so still she almost disappeared into the room. 32 years old, hair tied low. A simple black blazer. No jewelry, no expression. Vanessa had prepared for this morning for months. She knew exactly when to let her voice crack, when to pause and wipe away tears, when to let her hands tremble just enough to look heartbreakingly sincere. "She's not herself anymore, Your Honor." Vanessa's voice broke at the perfect moment. "Evelyn calls me in the middle of the night asking where her father is. She forgets to pay bills. She misses appointments. I'm genuinely afraid she might hurt herself if she keeps living alone." Behind her, the family section was nearly full. Aunt Lydia lowered her head with a tired sigh. Two cousins stared at Evelyn with a mixture of pity and discomfort. A red-haired woman sitting near the back nodded along to every word Vanessa said, as if she were listening to a sermon about morality. No one was on Evelyn's side, not a single person. Judge Warren slowly removed his glasses and looked toward her. He had worked in probate court for more than 20 years. He had seen families destroyed by money, seen siblings drag each other through court over nothing more than an old house. But there was something unsettling about how calm Evelyn looked. People who are truly panicking usually try to explain themselves. This girl didn't. She simply sat there, as if she were waiting for something. Vanessa continued. "Before Richard passed away, he begged me to take care of her. He knew Evelyn had been getting worse ever since the stress started." Her voice trembled again. "She can't manage the trust fund. She's going to lose everything." Whispers spread across the courtroom. One relative shook his head. Another sighed sadly. In their eyes, Evelyn had become a broken daughter destroyed by grief after losing her father. An unstable woman standing on the edge of ruining the family fortune. And Vanessa was the hero trying to save it all. But no one in that courtroom knew that for the past 6 months, Evelyn had secretly tracked every dollar disappearing from her father's trust. No one knew the woman they saw as fragile had once worked for a Seattle firm specializing in white-collar crime investigations. No one knew she had spent hundreds of sleepless nights in a tiny Tacoma apartment, staring at glowing computer screens while tracing hidden transactions through 3 separate shell companies. And no one knew that Vanessa herself had stolen nearly $2 million from Richard Harper's estate. Vanessa believed Evelyn's silence came from fear. That was her biggest mistake. Finally, Judge Warren spoke. "Miss Harper, would you like to respond to these allegations?" The entire courtroom turned toward Evelyn at once. Vanessa tightened her grip around the tissue in her hand. She had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. A breakdown, tears. One emotional reaction strong enough to make every accusation look true. But Evelyn simply rose to her feet. Slowly, calmly. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer and looked directly at Vanessa. Her eyes were so cold that the smile on her stepmother's face twitched for the briefest second. 3 seconds of silence passed, long enough to suffocate the room. Then Evelyn finally spoke. "Your Honor." Her voice was soft, but every word landed clearly. "I just want to make sure my stepmother has finished all of her testimony." She paused, her eyes never leaving Vanessa. "Because what I'm about to present next will turn every word she just said into evidence in a criminal investigation." Richard Harper died on a freezing morning at Bellevue Medical Center before the Seattle sky had fully brightened. The smell of antiseptic filled the 12th floor hallway. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor suddenly stretched into one long, chilling tone. Evelyn stood beside the hospital bed as the doctor confirmed the exact time of death. Vanessa wasn't there. She was standing at the far end of the hallway, speaking on the phone with her husband's financial advisor. That was the first thing that made Evelyn feel something was wrong. It wasn't the absence of tears. It wasn't grief. It wasn't the shock of a woman losing her husband after nearly 20 years of marriage. It was the calmness, a terrifying kind of calmness. Vanessa walked into the room 3 minutes after Richard died. She wrapped her arms around Evelyn just long enough for everyone else to see the comforting embrace of a devoted stepmother. "Your father isn't suffering anymore." Her voice sounded perfectly gentle, but her eyes were focused on the phone in the doctor's hand, as if she were counting time. Richard Harper's funeral took place 3 days later beneath Seattle's familiar gray rain. He had once been one of Washington's most respected logistics businessmen, a man who built a transportation company from a tiny warehouse in Tacoma and turned it into an operation worth tens of millions of dollars. The funeral was crowded. Business partners, old friends, relatives, people Richard had helped throughout his life. Vanessa wore a long black dress and stood beside the casket with a level of grief that looked almost cinematic. She knew exactly when to lower her head, when to let her voice tremble, when to press a hand against her chest as if her heart had shattered into pieces. Everyone believed she had loved Richard with her entire soul. Everyone except Evelyn, because she remembered far too clearly how Vanessa first entered their family 20 years earlier. Evelyn's mother died of cancer when she was 12 years old. 1 year later, Vanessa appeared. Blonde hair, expensive perfume, a smile so sweet it almost looked artificial. At the time, Richard looked like a man drowning in grief, and Vanessa arrived like the only life raft left in the ocean. But over time, Evelyn realized it had never been love. It was control. Little by little, Vanessa removed people from Richard's life. Old friends stopped being invited to the house. Richard's younger brother appeared less often after several strange arguments. Longtime loyal employees quietly resigned one after another. Richard's world became smaller and smaller, until eventually the only person left in it was Vanessa. And he never even noticed. 2 weeks after the funeral, the family attorney called Evelyn to a downtown Seattle office to review the trust fund. The room smelled of old wood and cold coffee. Vanessa sat near the window with both hands tightly folded together, until the will was read aloud. Richard left the Bellevue mansion to Vanessa, but almost the entire trust fund, along with the commercial investment system, belonged to Evelyn. The room fell silent for several seconds. Evelyn never forgot the moment Vanessa's face froze, very quickly, very subtly, but long enough to reveal the first genuine emotion Evelyn had ever seen from her: panic. The attorney continued explaining the trust structure, the company shares, and the long-term investment accounts. Vanessa barely listened anymore. She only stared at the documents in front of her as if someone had stolen the oxygen from the room. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Not because of the money, because of one strange detail hidden inside the financial reports: a small transfer to a company she had never heard of before. North River Holdings. $30,000. Then another transfer. $20,000. Then another. Every transaction had been divided into smaller amounts. Higular. Careful. Almost invisible. If Evelyn had never worked as a forensic accountant, she probably would have missed it entirely. But she had spent nearly 10 years investigating financial manipulation tied to white-collar crime in Seattle. She knew exactly what it felt like when a system was being drained from the inside. At 3 in the morning, Evelyn sat alone in her dark apartment with her laptop glowing in front of her. Rain continued tapping against the windows. She stared at page after page of transaction records, and the longer she looked, the colder her stomach became. Money doesn't disappear like this. Someone was taking it, and the only person with full access to the trust fund before Richard died was Vanessa. Evelyn leaned back slowly in her chair. Her heartbeat was heavy and controlled, and at that moment, only one thought existed in her mind. If Vanessa was truly stealing from her father's estate, then money would never be enough for her. Evelyn didn't call the police. She didn't confront Vanessa either. That was exactly what Vanessa wanted: an emotional reaction, An explosion. One moment of losing control that would turn Evelyn into the unstable daughter in the eyes of the entire family. And Evelyn understood that from the very beginning. 3 days after discovering the first suspicious transactions, she moved out of the downtown Seattle apartment her father had been helping her pay for. She rented a tiny studio in Tacoma above an old laundromat. The room was so cramped that the dining table nearly touched the edge of the bed. But Evelyn liked it there. No one paid attention to her in Tacoma. No one knew what she was doing. During the day, she appeared in front of the family, looking just exhausted enough to make Vanessa's story believable. Oversized sweaters, sleepless eyes, silence during family dinners. Sometimes, she even pretended to forget small details in conversations. And with every passing week, Vanessa became more confident. She believed her plan was working. In Vanessa's eyes, Evelyn was nothing more than a grieving woman slowly falling apart after her father's death. But every night after midnight, the tiny Tacoma studio stayed lit until sunrise. Laptop screens filled with data, notebooks covered in handwritten notes, bank statements, corporate filings, wire transfers. Evelyn spent hours staring at glowing screens with hastily tied hair and cups of black coffee gone cold beside her. She wasn't investigating emotionally anymore. She investigated like a forensic accountant. Cold, precise, merciless. After nearly 3 weeks of tracing the money flow, Evelyn realized North River Holdings was only the first layer. Behind it were two more companies: Emerald Horizon, LLC, Silver Pine Consulting. All three had been registered in Delaware through nominee agent services, a structure commonly used in financial fraud schemes. Money from Richard Harper's trust fund was broken into smaller transfers, moved through multiple shell companies, then eventually disappeared into a brokerage account in Oregon. An ordinary person never would have traced it. But Vanessa didn't know something important. Before moving into corporate crime investigations, Evelyn had worked with a team assisting federal fraud investigations. She had spent nearly 10 years tracking people far smarter than Vanessa. Some nights, Evelyn almost felt sorry for her. The plan was amateurish. Greed always makes people careless, and Vanessa was starting to make far too many mistakes. One evening, near the end of February, Evelyn was reviewing transaction logs when a new transfer appeared. $15,000. Destination account, Portland. But what made her stop wasn't the amount. It was the note attached to the transfer. Harborview Residence. Evelyn pulled up the property records immediately. 10 minutes later, she was staring at photographs of a luxury condo overlooking the Oregon coastline. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Oceanfront balcony. Expensive interior design. The property owner wasn't Vanessa. It was Daniel Mercer, a 38-year-old luxury realtor. Evelyn sat motionless for a long time. Then she opened the phone records delivered earlier that day by a private investigative team she had hired. Hundreds of phone calls. Hours-long conversations. Stretching back over 3 years between Vanessa and Daniel. 3 years. Meaning that while Richard was undergoing treatment for his heart condition, Vanessa had secretly been having an affair using his own money. A cold wave of anger moved down Evelyn's spine. But she didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She didn't call anyone. She simply kept saving files onto the hard drive, piece by piece. Like she was building a bomb Vanessa couldn't even see. Over the next several months, Vanessa became even better at playing the role of the worried stepmother. She called Aunt Lydia almost every day, telling her Evelyn wasn't sleeping, that she was having panic episodes, that she was starting to show the same mental problems her mother had before she died. That was the cruelest part. Vanessa was trying to turn grief itself into evidence against Evelyn. And the most terrifying thing was, everyone believed her. Some nights, Evelyn stayed awake until 4 in the morning staring at the rain outside her windows, wondering if she was taking things too far. Wondering if she really was becoming paranoid, like Vanessa claimed. Wondering if any of this was worth it. She started losing sleep for real. Started jumping every time her phone vibrated. Started dreading family dinners where Vanessa looked at her with fake sympathy in her eyes. That's what toxic people do. They make their victims feel insane before destroying them completely. But Evelyn kept going. Because the deeper she dug into the financial system surrounding Richard Harper's estate, the more she realized Vanessa didn't just want money. She wanted Richard's entire life. His name, his legacy, his wealth, and even the reputation of his daughter. Then one cold morning in early March, everything finally changed. An envelope from King County Probate Court appeared outside Evelyn's apartment door. She opened it immediately in the freezing hallway. Inside was an official petition. Vanessa Harper was asking the court to declare Evelyn mentally unfit to manage her finances and transfer full control of the trust fund to her. Evelyn read the papers very slowly. Then she laughed. For the first time in months. A small smile. Cold. Exhausted. But certain. Because finally, Vanessa had walked directly into the trap she believed she was setting for someone else. On the morning of the hearing, Seattle was so cold that people's breath turned into thin streams of white smoke in the air. Evelyn walked up the steps of King County Probate Court with a black binder held tightly against her chest. No one knew that inside it was something powerful enough to destroy Vanessa Harper's entire life. The courtroom was more crowded than she expected. Vanessa sat across from her, wearing an elegant navy dress and the pearl necklace Richard had bought for their 15th wedding anniversary. Martin Graves sat beside her. Calm, confident. He was one of the most respected probate attorneys in Seattle, a man who had won nearly every major estate dispute in the city for more than a decade. And he looked at Evelyn like she was already defeated. The Harper family filled the rows behind them. Aunt Lydia avoided looking at Evelyn. Several relatives stared at her with obvious pity. In their eyes, she was nothing more than a woman collapsing under the grief of losing her father. Vanessa had told that story very well. Martin stood first. Your Honor, we have substantial evidence showing that Miss Evelyn Harper is no longer mentally capable of managing a trust fund worth several $1,000,000 due to prolonged psychological instability. He handed documents to the court clerk. Neglected financial activity, reckless decisions, increasing signs of paranoid behavior. Vanessa lowered her head at the perfect moment. Her hands trembled slightly. A tear slipped down her cheek with the precision of something rehearsed many times before. She hasn't been eating properly for months, Vanessa said through a trembling voice. I only want to protect her. Whispers spread through the courtroom. Judge Warren slowly turned through the pages in front of him. Then he looked up at Evelyn. Miss Harper, is there anything you would like to say? Vanessa leaned back slightly in her chair. She was waiting. An emotional outburst. A scream. A mistake. One moment of losing control, and everything would be over. But Evelyn rose slowly to her feet. The room became so quiet that the sound of rain tapping against the distant courthouse windows could be heard clearly. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer and looked directly at Martin Graves first. Then at Vanessa. Her expression was so calm it felt unsettling. Your Honor, Evelyn said softly but clearly. I would like to make sure the petitioners have finished presenting all of their allegations. Martin frowned. Vanessa stiffened almost imperceptibly. A tiny feeling began forming in the pit of her stomach. Wrong. Something was wrong. Evelyn stepped forward and placed the black binder onto the table. The sound echoed sharply through the silent courtroom. I did not neglect the trust fund, Evelyn said. I spent the last 6 months tracking every dollar stolen from it. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Martin shot to his feet. Objection. But Evelyn continued. In the 10 months before my father died, nearly $2 million were transferred out of the trust through 3 separate shell companies. She opened the binder. Neatly organized colored tabs appeared one after another. North River Holdings, Emerald Horizon LLC, Silver Pine Consulting. All 3 were registered through nominee services in Delaware. Vanessa stopped blinking entirely. She stared at the binder as though she were looking at something that should not exist. Evelyn pulled out another stack of papers. These are the wire transfers. Another set. These are the IP logs. Then another. And these are the beneficial ownership records. The calmer Evelyn became, the more frightened the room started to feel. Because people who truly control a situation never need to raise their voices. Martin moved quickly toward the bench. Your Honor, We have not been given access to any of these documents. That's because I only received final confirmation from the federal forensic examiner last night, Evelyn replied immediately. She turned one page toward Judge Warren. The true owner of all three shell companies is Vanessa Harper. The courtroom froze. Aunt Lydia's mouth fell open. One relative let out a quiet gasp. Vanessa immediately stood up. She's lying. For the first time since the hearing began, all softness vanished from her voice. This is exactly what I've been talking about. She's paranoid. She's imagining all of this. But Evelyn didn't even look at her. She looked directly at Judge Warren. Your Honor, if this were only money laundering, then this would still be a civil fraud case. She paused. Martin Graves' expression changed instantly. The confidence was gone. Only caution remained. Then Evelyn pulled out the final set of documents. The red tab. But the petitioners made one serious mistake. She placed the paper carefully onto the table. The authorization letter granting Vanessa control over the trust fund that was submitted to this court. The entire room went silent. Evelyn slowly looked up. Is a forged document created after my father was already dead? No one moved for nearly 5 seconds. The entire courtroom sank into a silence so heavy it felt like a snowstorm waiting to collapse. Vanessa stood frozen. Even the color on her lipstick seemed to fade right in front of everyone's eyes. Martin Graves reacted first. Your Honor, I object to all of these accusations. He jumped to his feet so quickly that his chair crashed backward onto the floor with a sharp, violent sound. Those documents have not been authenticated. But this time, his voice was no longer steady. There was a faint tremor hidden inside every word. Evelyn looked directly at him. Cold, calm. The metadata from the PDF file shows the document was created on a computer registered under Martin Graves' legal group at 3:14 in the morning, 4 days after my father died. She placed another folder onto the table. This is a third-party forensic digital report. Judge Warren took the report into his hands. He read it slowly. And the longer he read, the colder his face became. Vanessa started breathing harder. She looked at Martin. Martin looked down at the table. Neither of them looked at each other again after that. The moment felt like a ship beginning to sink, while everyone on board suddenly realized there were not enough lifeboats left. No, Vanessa shook her head repeatedly. That's not what happened. Her voice cracked apart. Richard told me I could manage everything. He wanted me to do it. Then why did you forge the signature? Evelyn asked. One sentence. Short. Sharp as a blade. Vanessa Frozi. Several relatives behind her began exchanging confused looks. Aunt Lydia covered her mouth with her hand. For the first time in months, she looked at Vanessa like she was staring at a stranger. Evelyn continued opening the binder. These are transfer records from the trust fund into a real estate account in Oregon. Next page. These are luxury condo interior invoices under Daniel Mercer's name. Another page. And these are phone records between Vanessa Harper and Daniel Mercer over the last 3 years. Martin immediately interrupted. The affair is irrelevant to this case. It becomes relevant, Evelyn cut in, when that condo was purchased using money stolen from my father's trust fund. The courtroom exploded into whispers. Vanessa turned sharply toward Martin. He still refused to look at her. And in that exact moment, Vanessa understood. Martin was preparing to abandon her to save himself. For the first time, real fear finally appeared in her eyes. There was no stage anymore. No control. No performance as the devoted stepmother. Only a desperate woman trying to hold together a life collapsing piece by piece. You told me nobody would check the metadata, Vanessa blurted out in panic. Martin snapped toward her instantly. Shut up. Too late. Everything stopped once again. Judge Warren slowly removed his glasses. He stared at Martin for a long time. The look of a man realizing he had almost been turned into a tool for fraud. Mr. Graves, he said quietly, his voice cold. Did you know this document was forged? Martin said nothing. Sweat had already soaked through the collar of his shirt. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. The man who once promised he would handle everything was now leaving her completely alone in a courtroom filled with horrified eyes. Evelyn remained standing beside the table. Her heart was pounding violently, but her face stayed calm. For months, she had imagined this moment hundreds of times, not for revenge, for survival. Because she understood one thing very clearly. If she failed today, Vanessa would take everything. The trust fund, Richard's name, her reputation, and Evelyn would become the unstable daughter everyone avoided. Finally, Judge Warren spoke. The petition for conservatorship is denied in full. His voice echoed across the courtroom. This court will forward all related materials to the Criminal Investigation Division. Vanessa collapsed back into her chair immediately. She didn't cry anymore, didn't scream, didn't perform. She simply sat there motionless, as though all strength had been drained from her body. But Evelyn recognized that kind of silence. It wasn't grief. It was the moment a narcissist realizes for the first time that they no longer control the story. Judge Warren continued. Given the interstate wire transfers and evidence of money laundering, I will also be referring this matter to federal authorities. Martin closed his eyes very slowly. He understood everything was over. His career, his reputation, his law license, everything. Aunt Lydia burst into tears in the row behind them. She approached Evelyn after the hearing ended. "I'm sorry," she whispered through trembling breaths. "I really believed her." Evelyn looked at the older woman standing in front of her. For months, she had imagined she would feel furious when this moment finally came. But she didn't. She only felt tired. People believed her because she was very good at pretending to be the victim. Evelyn's voice was soft. That's what people like Vanessa always do. Outside the courthouse, the rain still hadn't stopped. Two federal investigators were speaking with Martin Graves near the front steps. Farther away, Vanessa stood alone beneath the freezing overhang. No one walked toward her anymore. No family. No lawyer. No audience. Only a woman finally forced to face the truth she had spent her entire life running from. 1 year after the hearing at King County Probate Court, Seattle entered autumn beneath long rows of bright red maple trees surrounding Lake Washington. Life had finally become quiet again. No more letters from lawyers. No more midnight calls from unknown numbers. No more waking up each morning feeling like she had to prepare for war against someone trying to destroy her. Evelyn stood beside the window of her new apartment in Capitol Hill, with a warm cup of coffee resting between her hands. Below her, the city moved exactly as it always had, as if nothing had ever happened. But some things had changed forever. Vanessa Harper accepted a plea deal 6 months earlier. She avoided a federal trial by pleading guilty to financial fraud and interstate wire laundering. 3 years in federal prison, 10 years of probation. Every asset connected to the case was seized. Martin Graves lost his law license almost immediately. His name disappeared from his firm's website overnight. Daniel Mercer left Oregon after the federal investigation began. No one heard from him again. And Evelyn. She didn't feel victorious the way she once imagined she would. There was no cinematic moment. No satisfaction. Only relief. As if she had finally set down something far too heavy that she had carried for too long. The trust fund had finally been completely restructured. Evelyn fired nearly all of her father's old financial advisors. She hired a new fiduciary firm in Seattle. Smaller. Less glamorous. But transparent. The kind of system Richard Harper should have had from the very beginning. Part of the money from the trust was used to create a scholarship in her mother's name at the University of Washington for young women studying accounting and financial law. On the day she signed the scholarship documents, Evelyn sat in her car outside the campus gates for a very long time. Some wounds never disappear completely. They simply learn how to stay quiet. Therapy helped far more than Evelyn ever expected. At first, she hated it. Hated sitting in front of a stranger talking about her family. About gaslighting. About the months she spent being turned into the unstable one inside someone else's version of reality. But there was one thing her therapist once told her that Evelyn never forgot. People who are manipulated for too long eventually begin to doubt their own reality. That was exactly what Vanessa had done to her. She didn't just steal money. She stole Evelyn's trust in herself. One windy afternoon near the end of October, Evelyn drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. Seattle was covered in restless wind that day. Yellow leaves scattered across the narrow stone paths between old graves. She stood silently in front of her father's grave for a long time. No tears, only silence. For a while, Evelyn had been angry at him. Angry that he never saw Vanessa for who she truly was. Angry that he allowed things to go so far. But eventually, she understood something. People like Vanessa do not manipulate through obvious cruelty. They manipulate through imitation love, through conditional care, through making others feel guilty for even questioning them. And sometimes, the kindest people are the easiest to trap. Evelyn placed flowers in front of the gravestone. Then she smiled softly when she thought about verdict. The three-legged rescue dog she adopted after the trial. The dog was unbelievably ugly. Uneven fur, bent ears, a crooked limp, but somehow always happy, as if life had never hurt him before. Her therapist once called it a healthy coping mechanism. Maybe she was right. Aunt Lydia still met Evelyn for lunch once every month now. At first, it was awkward. The guilt nearly crushed the older woman. But Evelyn no longer wanted to spend the rest of her life carrying resentment. She was too exhausted from carrying everyone else's pain. Some people think strength means being fearless, but Evelyn knew that wasn't true. She had been terrified for almost an entire year, terrified of losing everything, terrified nobody would believe her, terrified she was actually becoming crazy the way Vanessa claimed. But she kept going anyway. Not because she was brave, because sometimes survival is the only choice left. The sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Seattle faded into the cold orange light of evening. Evelyn rose from the stone steps in front of her father's grave as wind scattered leaves around her feet. 1 year earlier, she had walked into a courtroom carrying a black binder with hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the papers inside. Today, she finally understood the most important thing of all. Vanessa always believed power meant controlling the room, controlling the story, turning everyone into an audience for her performance. But real power was holding on to the truth long enough for it to speak for itself. If you have ever been manipulated in silence, if you have ever been treated like the problem simply because you saw the truth, remember this: you are not weak for staying quiet in order to protect yourself. Sometimes calmness is the most terrifying thing in the world to people who survive through lies. And if this story touched you, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional justice stories every week.